Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Dave Bailey, and I want to thank you for joining us. This is Grief and Grace. In my work with the largest provider of funeral services in North America, I see the personal and social reality of the current coronavirus pandemic on a daily basis. But I also see a new willingness to talk about grief in so many different contexts. And so this Facebook Live was started to be one of the spaces and one of the places, one of the voices that can help us to process a little bit of what we are all facing together. And if you know someone that you think could benefit from some of the ideas we're talking about here, why don't you go ahead and tag them in the comments so that they can get a notification and they can join us. Also, if you have a question throughout the show, just please feel free to put it in the comments. We'll take some time before the end of the show to answer those. My guest tonight is Oceana Sawyer, and I am very, very happy to have you. Let me bring up your, there we go. Oceana's an end-of-life doula. And as well, she's involved in helping to create dialogue and understanding around end-of-life issues in various spaces that honor the culture and the stories and the realities of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I am extraordinarily happy to have her here tonight. Welcome, Oceana.
Well, it's so good to be here, David. Continuing our conversation.
Yes. This is kind of the extension of a conversation that started a number of weeks ago, and I'm honored to have you as part of the show tonight. So why don't we start with this? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and how the work that you do has shaped and formed your understanding of grief?
Yeah, I am, just a middle-aged Black woman who had the privilege of being part of the death journey, first of my father 7 years ago, and then some close friends, and then my mother, and then lately extended folks. It all started with, how is it that you and I, Pops, are going to die well and with some intention? I had the good fortune of having a parent who was into it. Oh, wow. I'm dying well. Yes, I am. His intention was to party out, and I got to safely say he did that. My mother did something similar as well. And so I came to this work from those experiences. And since I have been a death doula, working with folks, having conversations with people about how am I going to die well, I would say that how that has informed my experience of grief has a lot to do with how, walking them through the process of getting to where you're going to be dying and how everybody around them experiences that process. And that can be varied. There are many types of grief, as you well know, David. And, what I got to experience with my father for the first time was just how grief came over me like a wave. I didn't expect it. And then along the way with my mother, just the anticipatory grief. I was with her for months before she died, and just how grief affected me in anticipation of her death and how we lost all kinds of things along the way. And then now in this current environment with experiencing, like so many of us, the violent deaths.
Yes.
And, I think so many people, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color, experiencing that as a true form of grief that's probably complicated by the many forms of grief we are experiencing on a regular basis,
Yes.
just being humans, and particularly being people who are targets of white supremacy. So I feel like what we're seeing now, or at least what I'm personally experiencing, is a rather complicated form of grief. And that's something, as a death doula, at least for me, I have not seen that often. And these are very extraordinary times.
Yes.
And so just sort of navigating these waves of grief, based on all the study and research and experience that I have, has been, I must say, revelatory and extraordinary.
Wow.
To be here in this place, in this body, right here and right now, is, it's sort of like all the ancestors
Yes.
have, like, I've been experiencing them quite a lot lately, just like, yes, this is our time. So how to show up in this grief, in this very particular grief space, has been hard and yet fascinating and rich.
Wow. Wow. One of the let me just pull you along on that idea for a bit. One of the phrases that gets used in relation to the work that you do is death positivity. So what does that mean, and how do you create that for the people and for the families that you work with?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing this up, David, because we actually talked about this in a webinar that I had the great privilege of being a part of last month, called Saying It Louder. It was a group of 6 Black women who talked about racism in the death industry. And, this whole idea of death positivity, some part of me wants to go, it's like this sort of airy fairy concoction that white women came up with, but I don't want to dismiss it that quickly, and I have done that. So, but really, in death positivity for me is all about how are we going to embrace death, in terms of it being just a natural part of life.
Yes.
And so now this is in a world where people get to die naturally.
Yes.
And I just want to say that is mostly how Black people die. They don't all die violent deaths. But they do die violent death disproportionately.
Yes. Tragically.
To cultural groups. But so death positivity is about embracing the death and dying process as being a natural part of life. That's what it means to me. So when you look at that through the lens of people of color, it looks a little, it's complicated.
Yes.
Now it's complicated by the context of racism. And so generally, when I'm working with a family, I'm trying to normalize death with them. That's one way that I create death awareness, and a positive attitude towards death awareness is, it's natural, it's normal. These phases that you were seeing, they've been seen before. I talk about them. This is how this is going to go now. Yes, right on schedule. So I just try to make their experience normal, not necessarily ordinary.
Yes.
But normal, because I believe that every death process, if it happens in its natural realm, is an exquisite opportunity for growth and transformation that none other provides, hardly. So just really try to get people to embrace it as a journey.
Yes.
As a very particular and very special kind of a journey.
And you do that in a really deliberate way with helping people. Tell us a little bit about the process that you do to help with that.
It's not any magic methodology, honestly. It's all of this. The work of a death doula mostly happens in the context of a conversation. It's just a lot of conversations, and you just keep being related to the person primarily, and then the family as the process is going along. So it's just a series of conversations. And of course, there's already a body of knowledge about this is how a death process looks. Yes. So as we reach those stages, and I do this before too, I kind of lay out a roadmap. This is how it's going to go. You know, at this point it'll look like this, at this point it'll look like this, and you may want to think about that. So I lay all that out up front, and then when we get to those points, I just remind them, okay, so we're now at this point, and this is what's happening, and this is what you could do to ease this process or be a part of this journey. So now that's, you know, a one, you know, in the best possible world, that's the kind of conversation we hope to be having. And now what we're looking at in terms of people of color, indigenous people, Black people, is what do those processes really look like, and how can they be meaningful for us?
Yes.
So now it's about making sure that they have all the stuff, because generally people have been dying historically in hospitals, and that tide has changed. You know, hospitals now are sending people home to die in hospice, and one of the problems in the communities of people of color is that hospice is sort of lacking. So now you're faced with you know, having to gather the community support, the family support, whatever that is. And really the work of the doula is to hold a container for that space to happen with some kind of, I'm looking for acceptance here. Like, this is how we do it. You know, we have music. You know, you bring the preacher in. You know, I did a virtual living funeral ceremony a couple of months ago. By the way, that's a great 2-hour workshop where I lead people through their own personal mock funeral.
Yes.
So they get to write their last words. They get to go through the process of dying, imagining what that would look like physically to die. And then they come back to life. So, you know, now that you've died and come back to life, how is it that you're going to be living going forward? So I had one amazing woman, Latinx, who had her entire indigenous community and spiritual tools available to her. She had already thought it out. And so, you know, to have space for people to have their spiritual traditions, you know, have their spiritual leaders, have the kind of music and the ambience and the food. It's not all candles and, you know, kumbaya. You know, it's going to be, you know, if you're Black, it's going to be gospel music. Do you know how hard it was for me to find gospel music, you know, to get the hospice people to, you know, get me some gospel performers to sing out My Mother, you know? And the Threshold Choir came. And by the way, if you don't know about the Threshold Choir, those ladies are amazing. And I want to say that an incredible sister, Melanie DeMoore, was one of the founders of the Threshold Choir, and a lot of their music is stuff that she has written. Wow. And it's deep and it's soulful, without being, you know, appropriating. So it you know, so just to pay attention, and it doesn't mean that you personally, the doula, if you're not a person of color, you don't need to know what all of that is, because you're not.
Yes.
And that's fair to say. If you happen to be in that spot, what I've said recently is, what you could do is you could find yourself someone of color or culture who's willing to partner with you to help, to support a family of culture who is at the end of life.
Yes.
At the very minimum, just making space.
Yes.
And acknowledging what you don't know. And you could ask questions. You could be curious. Does the mother need to be here now? Does the daughter, the cousins? Oh, this is an auntie, but it's not, but this isn't really a blood auntie. All those questions, forget all that crap. Just allow what is happening to occur, hold space for how different people have that end of life process.
Yes.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. I have a sense you could probably answer it for a lot longer as well. It just flows out of you in such energy and beauty. Thank you. Let me take this conversation a little bit deeper into some of the spaces that we've had a chance to talk about. This is a really difficult time. There's an intersection of so much grief. There's the intersection of people's personal grief. There's the intersection of a psychosocial grief of all the loss that's going around us. And there's the intersection of deep cultural grief that is embedded in DNA and in stories and whatever. So part of the goal of this Facebook Live, when I started it, was to, expand our understanding of different aspects of grief in our society. And I personally have to be honest and say that for me, let me just talk in the first person, that I don't think that many of us in the white community can even begin to comprehend the grief that is bound up in the African American experience. Oof. That's gonna make me verklempt. And how that grief plays out in cultural ways and in social ways. So can you talk to us about that?
I was listening to Rasma Menakem this morning, a podcast he did on Being. That is, by the way, if you want an understanding of how race-based, how Black people are grieving right now, the race-based trauma and the complicated grief that we're experiencing right now, Rasma Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands.
Do you have it? Do you have it? Do you have it right there? Can you do?
No, I don't. I don't have it here. But I listened to him speak this morning, and it was just beautiful. And I mean, he really talks about how, this, what you alluded to, this sort of intergenerational, trauma that everyone is experiencing. The 13 colonies, were once colonized.
Yes.
So, everybody, white cultures, white-bodied cultures, people of other cultures, all have these generations of trauma that you kind of can see being played out now in the systems that we have. So specifically in the system of racism, white supremacy, you have a group of people who are still traumatized, recovering from being stolen from their country, crossing the Atlantic, a horrific thing all on its own. And you got here, now you land in this country full of these people who are lacking in melanin, practically translucent. They look like ghosts. And what the hell, am I dead? Of course, very soon you realize you wish you had. But so that whole trauma is still active in the DNA of the people who are alive right now, myself.
Yes.
So the I actually don't remember what the question is, but I do. What I want to say is that the the process of recovering from white supremacy, racism, is going to be different for all the different people involved.
Yes.
You know, for white-bodied people, it's one thing. You know, it's how do you recover from the messaging and the acculturation and the conditioning of being white that's in your body now, enough to make space to actually be present for a new reality, a reality in which all people can show up.
Yes.
And then how do you, as an African American person, that's a different path, you know, this healing the trauma and the complicated grief of not only the historic wounding, and that wound is like a weird word, I erase that, the historic trauma, assault, with what you are experiencing right now, you know, like every day.
Yes.
Every day, like death by 1,000 paper cuts, if you're lucky. If you're lucky, you know, mostly it's just a barrage of mental, physical, emotional assaults, from small to quite large, life-threatening, most of them. So, you know, that is a different process, but but that is work we are all called to be doing right now. This is how we got to be in this time and space, right here, right now. It's not an accident.
No.
This is your moment. You could actually take up the mantle of being here right now in this moment and what it means for you in the body you're in. And how are you going to manage your own process, your own excavation, your own healing enough to actually be present for this incredible moment in time where we could actually see a shift. And then a lot of people are saying, I already see a shift. And I don't want to naysay that. It's true on some level. It is already, at least in my short history on the planet, a different conversation. You know, like the one that we got to have.
Yes.
Where you did your white male thing. And
come on now.
I said, in my black female response was like, whoa. And you and I both had the presence of mind to pause the moment and look at, unpack what was actually happening.
Yes.
Enough that we are now having this conversation today. You know, so that is, and that's what's required.
Yes.
I think at this time. Oh my, look at that! I got like 5 minutes left, and I'm just talking.
No. We're good. One of the things that you said, I mean, I think it's a phrase that gets used in a variety of contexts, but it just was really an incredible word picture for me. That when you're in a certain heart space, when you're in a certain sense of yourself, for me as a white male, whatever that place is, how do you make space for other people's insight, other people's wisdom, other people themselves, other people's journey, other people's story? When you said that, just that making space, that was such an evocative idea for me, that's part of the journey of just making space, you know, and I think that's what happened in us. I mean, oh my God, our very first conversation, the only word I can use for it was rather clumsy on my part. and you,
that's a nice word, David.
Yes, and you weren't sure whether you wanted to continue to have that conversation, but thank God we have. And it's yeah.
So it's your question about how do you, in your white body, make space to be in this conversation,
in this moment. Yeah.
this moment. I don't know. What I have been saying and continue to see is possible is, at least for me, in terms of being in relationship with people in white bodies, is to do the work.
Yes.
It's like what you said in your email. It is going to be a lifetime.
Yes.
It is a lifetime journey and more.
Yes.
This unlearning, this unpacking, this reconditioning, this excavation of all you have been taught how to be in this system. If you're going to make any kind of lasting change in this system, it's going to have to, in some degree, possibly the primary degree, largely, it's going to come from inside of people. People being willing to actually look,
yes,
stop, feel what it feels like. That's one of the things about what I like about Rithma's work is, he centers the conversation on the body. And I think that's important because that was certainly my experience in my initial conversation with you. What I noticed was, oh, my guts were constricting.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a way preparing for battle. And that is the experience of people of color all the time. It's like a lived experience. And for you in your white body, the opportunity is to notice how you feel. Did you notice my contraction? We're doing this virtually, but we're human beings. Energy, you can still feel that.
Yeah.
I can feel you now, your little wheels turning. So, our bodies are geared to take cues, facial cues, body cues, so we can know each other without being actually physically with each other or know anything more about each other. So that whole piece about what did you notice? Could you have paused long enough to notice how you were feeling in your body in relationship to me and the conversation we were having? And I saw that change for you in my response as I was talking to you. You were like, way up here, and then you came down. And that is the space where you can start to make space.
Yes.
That is exactly the moment where it's uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for me and it was uncomfortable for you, but that is exactly the moment where we have some hope of actually finding something true.
So true. So true.
A way to be together.
Yes. We were talking this morning. I said to you, I think in this whole process, in our conversation and in all the reading that I'm doing and all the listening that I'm doing, which is, I think, the space that I'm trying to put myself in, it's occurred to me that all of us want to have the ground under our feet as solid, and that solid psychic ground is built on all of our assumptions and whatever those assumptions might be. And I realized that it's so easy to have a whole group of assumptions about the other. And racism is essentially the sum total of all of the assumptions that I make about the other. And I wondered out loud to you, at the end of the day, whether do I have the potential to be a non-racist? I'm not sure I do. What I do have the potential to be is anti-racist, to be fully committed to unearthing and looking at and discarding assumptions that just don't work, and having voices like yours speak into my life and go, that thing you just said, can we talk about that? And constantly being willing, just willing to examine the assumptions that I make and whether they're real.
This was great. That whole thing you just did was fantastic. So yes, you are not going to not be racist. You are racist. And exactly what you said. Perhaps you can get to know enough about what it is to be a racist to not do harm.
Yes.
And to actually be possibly related to people who are targets of racism. I just want to point out that you refer to people who are not white as other. This is, I'm only using this as an example because everybody does it. You're not the first and you won't be the last, and people are doing it, have been doing it as we've been speaking, I'm sure. I may have even done it. It's just so part of the air we breathe. But I just want to say this is actually one of the pieces, about racism is our society is centered on white people, white male people. So as soon as you say other or diversity, it's like diverse from what? Other from what? I am not other. I'm me.
Yes. Yeah. I hear you. I do hear you.
It's the shift of decentralizing yourself in the conversation. And this is going to be so hard.
Yes.
I can't even imagine. I just can't. It's going to be hard.
Yes.
It's like the air you breathe.
Yes.
To be centered in the conversation, have everything else be other, not white, male. So, but look at you. You're still here. We're still talking.
Yes.
And that is the hope.
That is the hope. Yes. Yes, that is the hope. Yeah. Wow. If there was one thing that you would want to help me understand about grief, what would it be? What would that be?
Oh, that it is not all sadness.
Okay.
Grief is a very complex and rich process. It's not an emotion. It is a complex series of emotional responses, psychological responses, physical responses, spiritual responses. It is deep and rich. And so often when I hear people talk about grief, I hear them talking about it in this sort of very flat, monolithic way, sadness. And when I tell people, yeah, I'm grieving, you don't look sad, but this is me grieving.
Yes.
This is me. This is me right here, right now. I am grieving. I am having a conversation with you. I have laughed a few times. I'm coherent at the moment. But sometimes grief can look like confusion. Sometimes it can look like fear. It could be relief.
Wow.
Like, wow, I can't believe I had that big journey and it's over and this person's free. It can be joy. It can be so many things. And that is the one thing I want to say about grief. It's so much bigger than we talk about it. And the truth is that we're all grieving something.
Yes.
So, to say that grief is just sadness kind of flies in the face of how we're actually walking around and living our lives. And we're doing all kinds of things in our lives, and we're still all grieving. Wow. I personally am grieving, the loss of my mother last year, and I'm grieving the violent deaths of my people. But, I'm also grieving that I don't get to go to the beach right now because of the pandemic. So, there are all kinds of things that we're grieving. And it can look all kinds of ways.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There'd be an interesting Venn diagram to intersect all of the forms of grief that we're facing together. And I think, if there's one thing that I'm so thankful for, I'm thankful for our entire conversation tonight, but just the reality of the deep levels of grief that are embedded in the BIPOC community, and I appreciate you and your insights into that. I wanted to ask you about one thing before we go. There was a comment that got made, because of something you said and I said. The reference to DNA interests me. I come from that from the standpoint of I don't know if you've ever read any of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, but his book The Body Keeps the Score, fascinating. How trauma goes down through the generations in the DNA, and that the body keeps the score, and we could have a long discussion about that, I'm sure. But tell us again the book you were talking about, My Grandmother's Hands, and is that and how that.
Well, what he talks about, he approaches. It's a very long title, I will tell you. It's racialized trauma and the pathways to mending our hearts and our bodies. So he's looking at the conversation about racialization, racism, oppression through the body, somatically. And he is, he's studied this. He's done the science, done the research, and so he can tell you about how the body holds all the ways that we have brought through our family history, the different types of trauma and how it manifests. I mean, like, for instance, I have rheumatoid arthritis. There are, you could say it's genetic. I have a cousin and an aunt who also have rheumatoid arthritis. So that's one level of it. But I did not manifest my rheumatoid arthritis until I began researching a doctoral research in the Middle Passage and the effect of the Middle Passage on African American people right now, the gestalt of of what we are living in, how we are being. And so I had to stop that research. I was actually too sick to go on, and then I needed to go back to work because I needed medical insurance. But the diseases, how we show up, physically, culturally, the violence, the addictions, all of these are these passed on. We're dealing with the passed on traumas. Yes. And that's not just African American people, that's all of us.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. So how do you spell his name? I'll put this up. I'll put this up on the website when we're done. But again, how do you spell his name?
R-E-S M-A-A Meniken M-E-N-A-K-E-M.
All right. I'll put that up on the website when we're done, and you can access that. My Grandmother's Hands.
Yeah.
And Oceana, it's been my honor to have you speak into my life, into our lives tonight. Thank you. I expect this will not be a long time. We'll have this conversation many times. We will And we talked about already that we'll be doing book exchanges. I'll be sending you a, hey, have you read this? And you'll be like, no, have you read this? Speaking of that, I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown. Oh my God. If you're looking for a book to read I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. It will challenge you to the core, especially if you come from an evangelical background or you've worked at an evangelical not-for-profit. Yeah.
Austin is love, and she's so heartfelt and smart.
Yes. Yes. So I'm Still Here, Austin Channing Brown. Thank you. I hope that we can do this again many times. Thank you for offering me your hand, your wisdom, your friendship, your voice. I am full of thankfulness. So, yeah.
Thanks for showing up.
Yes, thank you. All right. Even after this live is over, you can still leave comments or questions, and I'll be coming back to review those comments and interact with you as we go forward. And don't forget to click on notifications so that you can get a reminder when we're ready to go live. And if you've gotten value out of tonight, as I know you have, please feel free to share all of this on your social media platforms. And please go to Oceana's website. You saw it up there, Oceana endoflifedoula.com, and take advantage of that. I also want to let you know that on Wednesday night, Wednesday, July 15th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, WPSU will be hosting a special screening of the documentary Speaking Grief on their WPSU Grief Facebook page. If you saw the interview a couple of weeks ago with Lindsay Whistle Fenton, you know that she's the producer and director and writer of the documentary, and I'm really excited that you finally get to see it in all of its entirety. We showed you the trailer on that show, but now you'll get to see it in its entirety. And the screening will be followed by a virtual Q&A that will be moderated by Janet DiCristofaro, who is the host of the podcast Grief Out Loud, and it'll include Lindsay as well as Z. Walters, who is one of the people featured in the documentary, and some experts in grief support and the grief journey like Megan Devine, who has Refuge in Grief, and Kevin Carter of the Uplift Center for Grieving Children, and Maria Collins from the New York Life Foundation. So we're going to be hosting a watch party here on this site. So if you want to come 8 o'clock on Wednesday night, you can join us on that watch party. So yeah, thank you for being here, everybody. Just so glad that you were here. Thank you again to Oceana, and we'll see you next Monday. Stay safe, everybody.